Today, I'm diving into some crazy school rules from the 60s that would totally blow the minds of kids today. School rules from the 1960s were incredibly strict, and it's amazing to think about how different they were from the norms we have today. Kids back then had to deal with rules that were so restrictive, it's a wonder they were able to learn anything at all. The environment was much more disciplined, and any kind of disobedience was met with severe punishment. This was just a part of everyday life for students in the 60s, and it's fascinating to look back on. Kids in the 60s faced a multitude of challenges due to these strict rules. For one, they had to adhere to a very strict dress code, which varied from school to school but was always highly regulated. Boys had to wear ties and trousers, while girls had to wear skirts that were a certain length below the knee. Any kind of deviation from this was met with punishment, and it was a big deal if you didn't follow the rules. This kind of strictness affected not just their appearance but also their attitude towards authority. The strict rules also meant that any kind of disobedience was punished severely. Corporal punishment was still widely accepted, and it wasn't uncommon for kids to get hit with a ruler or paddle for even minor infractions. This kind of punishment had a profound effect on the kids, making them much more submissive and less likely to question authority. The teachers and administrators had complete control over the students, and it was a very one-sided relationship. The school experience was also shaped by the social norms of the time. Segregation was still a big issue in many parts of the country, and schools were often divided along racial lines. This meant that kids from different backgrounds had very different experiences, and it was much harder for them to interact with each other. The rules and regulations reinforced these social norms, making it even more difficult for kids to bridge the gap between different racial and socioeconomic groups. The rules in the 60s also dictated what kids could and couldn't do in terms of extracurricular activities. Sports were highly regulated, and only certain sports were considered acceptable for boys and girls. Girls were often limited to activities like cheerleading or tennis, while boys were encouraged to play football or basketball. This kind of limitation affected not just their physical health, but also their social development, as they were restricted in their ability to interact with each other outside of the classroom. When you look at specific rules from the 60s, it's astonishing to see how different they were from modern-day practices. Dress codes were just the tip of the iceberg. Disciplinary actions were also much harsher, and the lack of technology meant that kids had to rely on much more traditional methods of learning. For example, calculators were not allowed in the classroom, and kids had to do all their math calculations by hand. This made math classes much more challenging, but it also helped kids develop their problem-solving skills. The lack of technology also meant that kids had to be much more resourceful and independent. They had to do their own research using physical books and libraries, and they had to be able to write essays and reports by hand. This kind of work helped them develop their critical thinking skills and attention to detail, which are still essential skills today. However, it's also clear that the lack of technology limited their access to information and hindered their ability to collaborate with each other. Dress codes were also incredibly strict, and any kind of deviation was met with punishment. Boys had to wear ties and trousers, while girls had to wear skirts that were a certain length below the knee. The rules also dictated what kind of shoes kids could wear and what kind of accessories were allowed. For example, boys were not allowed to wear earrings, and girls were not allowed to wear too much makeup. This kind of strictness affected not just their appearance but also their attitude towards authority and their sense of individuality. In comparison to modern-day practices, the rules from the 60s seem incredibly outdated. Today, kids are encouraged to express themselves and be individual, and the dress codes are much more relaxed. Kids are also much more likely to question authority and challenge the status quo, which is a big change from the submissive attitude of kids in the 60s. The shift towards more progressive and inclusive policies has been a long time coming, and it's clear that the rules from the 60s would not be acceptable today. One of the most outrageous rules from the 60s that would definitely shock today's youth is the practice of corporal punishment. The idea that kids could be hit with a ruler or paddle for even minor infractions is horrifying, and it's clear that this kind of punishment had a profound effect on the kids. It's also astonishing to think that this kind of punishment was widely accepted and even encouraged by parents and administrators. The fact that it was so widely accepted is a testament to the strict and disciplined culture of the time. This rule is particularly shocking because it's so at odds with modern-day practices. Today, corporal punishment is widely recognized as a form of abuse, and it's illegal in many countries. The idea that kids could be physically harmed as a form of punishment is horrifying, and it's clear that this kind of practice would not be tolerated today. The fact that it was so widely accepted in the 60s is a reminder of how far we've come in terms of recognizing and protecting the rights of children. The practice of corporal punishment also had a profound effect on the kids who experienced it. It made them much more submissive and less likely to question authority, which had a lasting impact on their social and emotional development. It's also clear that this kind of punishment affected their attitude towards authority and their sense of self-worth. The fact that it was so widely accepted and encouraged by parents and administrators is a testament to the strict and disciplined culture of the time. The rule that would shock today's youth the most is probably the one that allowed teachers to use corporal punishment as a form of discipline. The idea that kids could be hit with a ruler or paddle for even minor infractions is horrifying, and it's clear that this kind of punishment had a profound effect on the kids. It's also astonishing to think that this kind of punishment was widely accepted and even encouraged by parents and administrators. The fact that it's so at odds with modern-day practices makes it even more shocking, and it's a reminder of how far we've come in terms of recognizing and protecting the rights of children. In conclusion, the school rules from the 60s were incredibly strict and would definitely shock kids today. From the strict dress codes to the harsh disciplinary actions, it's clear that kids back then had a very different experience than kids today. The rules and regulations reinforced the social norms of the time, making it even more difficult for kids to bridge the gap between different racial and socioeconomic groups. If you're as shocked as I am by these crazy school rules from the 60s, be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know which rule shocked you the most. And don't forget to check out another related video on school culture, where we dive into even more wild and outdated rules that will blow your mind.